Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. Here we are in June, and yeah, welcome. So, starting off with announcements. I think since the last meeting, maybe we declared 530 stable, right? That happened in the last 2 weeks. So 530 is stable, and I pushed the buttons to make it go. It went. No one has said anything, so that's probably good news.
We should tweet from the Osquery account. Someone owns that Twitter, right?
Yeah, it's probably me. I think Zach and I have access to that. And put a tweet up or something.
Yeah, and then I'll get some retweets for you.
Any other announcements?
I presented at McDevOps on Osquery endpoint security. I think the video should be out in a week or two. I'll post a link if people are interested. It's a very small 15-20 minute talk.
Congratulations.
People seem to be excited about it or looking forward to using it. So.
Other announcements? If not, next section is sort of an open questions, issues, PRs section. Broadly speaking, if anyone wants to raise anything that they feel didn't merit an agenda item, now's a good time. Otherwise, we'll just jump into agenda. Okay. Moving into agenda. First agenda item is a proposed change or optionality to the scheduler.
Yeah, I added this. We all know the background, like for scheduled queries, the interval is basically, every n of Osquery uptime plus or minus drift. So it's based on ticks of Osquery, the process being uptime and not actually being the wall clock. So I've kind of detailed like the current implementation, what it does, and how we currently execute the scheduled queries. There's some drawbacks to this, like if Osquery restarts, the current like time interval resets. This kind of causes some confusion. Some intervals are like longer than expected. And sometimes there's always query restarts before the interval, like the query would never execute. For workstations that can sleep or offline, it's kind of unpredictable, like how often the queries actually run. So I wanted to get some thoughts on, having a proposal to like have an option to make scheduled queries work on wall clock. I know there have been previous discussions like 4 years back, but that was back when Office Hours was on Blue Jeans and we weren't taking notes. I think this has come up often. And I think like, one simple option is just, to use the last executed time of scheduled query. We already have that information in Osquery schedule table and kind of use that to schedule the next query at that interval to kind of make it more predictable. And the other approach is to, on startup, store the Unix epoch in RocksDB, kind of calculate the drift, forward the clicks.
I'll start. So this is something I've seen a lot of people confused about over time, right? Like, what does interval mean? I don't know that I've ever seen anyone unhappy once they understood it, but a lot of people have been confused. I wonder, is there a reason we do it this way? And like, does it make sense just to change the scheduler semantics? Or, like, would it be add an option, or should we just change scheduler semantics?
The reason I considered like it as an optional thing is because I don't know this and kind of like take this into account into their configs and schedules. That figured it's an optional thing.
I wonder if we could phase it in over a couple of releases. I just kind of, if we think it's the right thing, I wonder if it's better just to sort of transition it.
I think it could definitely be interesting to introduce it as an option that's off by default, and then on Osquery 6 probably switch it to on by default.
Something like that, yeah.
Would people have concerns about, like, let's say we're talking about a workstation or a server? In either case, let's say the device or the computer has been, let's call it halted, whether it was turned off or asleep doesn't necessarily matter that much. But let's say it was halted for some hours. There were a number of queries that were scheduled for running on some number of minutes or maybe once an hour or something. When it resumes operation, it might execute all of those queries in fairly rapid succession. How does that land on folks?
I think that that's an orthogonal question. I think that you have to build some kind of splay in, right? Like today, we don't guarantee exact scheduler semantics, and I think that would have to carry through, right? And I don't know what that code would look like. I think it would be reasonable to be like, oh, here's one, execute it, and wait a minute, here's another, execute it. I think it would be bad to be like, you're awake, have 10 queries running now. But I think that that's like tiny details to me. On your proposal, you asked sort of what people thought about just looking at last execute time versus like the startup epoch. The startup epoch sounds real complicated, so my bias would be to just use last executed time. And I don't know if we store something about like successful or unsuccessful executions or how to kind of track that. And I don't know, figure it out when you write the code.
Yeah, I haven't dug in. I know we store last execution, but I don't know if it stores it even if the query failed. I think it does, because execution is execution, whether it's a successful one or a failed one. But yeah, I think I'll need to like dig in a bit more, do some tests. And I'm sure there'll be some gotchas that we'll uncover.
My bias would be towards the simpler.
Yeah, simpler. Okay.
And I guess this seems most compelling to me from having Osquery behave how people expect it to behave, much more so than changing the semantics. Like the semantics feel okay either way to me, so it's just more interesting to have it be what people expect. So last execute time sounds like what people expect to me, not sort of something complicated around startup epoch back calculating.
I mean, making Osquery do what people expect is something that is definitely a goal of mine. Even if it's been the other behavior for a long time. Like, Trail of Bits folks, thoughts from you? I know you support Osquery for a lot of large organizations.
Sorry, I was typing on the agenda. I didn't miss the question.
The question is, is it in the agenda? Sorry, I don't have the agenda open. But
I was adding to the agenda, so I missed your question.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Mike. My question was, I know that it sounds like Charville proposed this. Seth thinks it's reasonable to move towards what people might expect from Osquery more than what it has done historically. And I wanted to hear from you, Trail of Bits folks, based on your experience supporting Osquery with a lot of larger deployments. Do you anticipate, or do you have concerns about potentially moving towards this scheduling strategy as the default?
The scheduling being more frequent?
The scheduling being essentially we track the last executed time of queries. And so rather than using ticks, which is sort of Osquery ticks once every second while the computer is actually turned on and not hibernating and that kind of thing. Instead, use wall time as the basis for when queries execute.
Honestly, I hadn't heard of this discussed, so I would say it sounds reasonable, and I don't think anyone would object.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there necessarily be any customer objecting. Maybe, I mean, I know it's considered a tiny detail, but well, we have to be slightly careful maybe on the queries that have a low interval, maybe queries on events, and how we handle that display. If it's like, is it percentage? Is it a fixed amount of minutes? And if it is longer than the normal interval, I mean, I'm not saying it's not doable. Just yeah, we have maybe to like set for short time, for instance, a 1 minute interval to a query that was querying every 10 seconds, and then maybe reduce it each time until we hit the 10 seconds. And I mean, this is in the case where you have multiple queries that would start at the same time due to the fact that the PC has, the workstation has slept for a long time.
Maybe coming at that a little differently, I think there's a common schedule I think people are going to run is something like have a bunch of queries that run every hour, every day, right? Some kind of common fixed interval. And I think based on how Osquery works today, those end up splayed out temporally, right? So, over the course of an hour, you get these queries that come in. A simple implementation of this would cause all of those to start lining up and happening at the same time. I don't know if that's good or bad. I just observe it as being. Initially, it feels bad to me, but that might just be because I don't like change. Or it might be because it all happens because like it clumps load, and I like spreading load out just by default. So I don't. It's something to think about when you go poke in code.
So yeah, and the load is also clumped. You might say with the current approach, because let's say you have a bunch of queries scheduled for an hour. When Osquery starts up, splays are applied to each of those, but it's still going to be within, at least by default, within 10% of that hour mark of Osquery running that all of the queries execute.
Yeah, but they won't converge. Right. The thing about moving to a wall clock time is that if you don't recalculate the splay, it would cause queries to converge over time. Because if your machine is off for half an hour, then anything that would have executed in the half hour would then execute on boot. If you're off for another, right? So it's sort of over time, you're causing a convergence.
Right. I guess the longer the machine is online uninterrupted, the more sort of spread out the queries will become. But yeah, if it's being open and closed constantly, then you will cause some convergence.
The other maybe interesting note here is we've talked about the idea of having queries that run immediately on start or soon thereafter. I don't know if you want to think of those. They're totally different, but I kind of want to mention it anyhow. So another perennial wish list item in terms of scheduling behavior.
So that would be run immediately on start once and then kind of go into the schedule.
One of the conversations we've had that so it's really common that you want some kind of inventory, right? Like select star from apps, right? And Collide and probably Fleet both do this. Well, I guess I'm not sure about Fleet, but Collide, does this by having a scheduled query, select star from apps on whatever interval we have, roughly a day. But then to sort of get that initial startup behavior, we also enqueue it via the distributed read interface, right? I think Fleet does something similar, right? As that here's your distributed read load. So this always feels very awkward server side, right? Like there's just all these pieces we juggle to kind of have it go in that way. So there's sort of the idea of being able to bake a config file that says, schedule this once a day. Oh, and do it on Osquery startup, right? As opposed to just splay it out 24 hours. No one's ever bothered to write it, but it's near this code.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, I completely see the motivation for wanting to be able to run scheduled queries like immediately and then continuing on the interval. It doesn't affect that particular use case for us in Fleet because we collect what we call host vitals through live queries. So we don't have to. It sounds like you have to do a little bit of that dance of like live query and then scheduled query. We just do live queries sort of on interval as appropriate. But I still completely see the motivation for wanting scheduled queries to run immediately. And I've heard people mention that also in the context of like they have often containers that are short-lived and they want to run OS query in them, and they want query, you know, if the container runs for multiple hours, they want the query to run once every hour. But if they have a container that's only up for 45 minutes, then they'll get the query to run 0 times unless they, you know, say it should be scheduled every 10 minutes, but then they're running it, you know, 6 times as much as they actually want to be if the container does stay up. So that kind of thing is a motivation that I am totally on board with.
Anything else on scheduler semantics?
So it sounds like, I mean, Charvel, it sounds like we should probably come up with a proposal for exactly how this would work, and then kind of get that ratified with folks before we go to implement.
Yeah, I just
you
so-
could do that. It sounds like you have broad support here, so you know, with some caveats around trying to avoid clumping and I don't know, figure out how event semantics work. And I don't know if I were writing this, I'd have to just write the code to work out those details. So.
Cool. So Charvel, we can reconnect and think about what's the best way to hammer out the details.
Mhm.
Next agenda item is Osquery schema documentation issues, which I think probably stems off of a comment I made, but this looks like maybe a ticket from Mike.
I actually put this on. There are a bunch of like new users that are kind of getting confused, and I noticed that there's a little bit of misdocumented tables in our schema docs. So, for example, secure boot table is implemented only in Linux and Windows, and the table spec is marked linwin, but on the website it shows it's available for all platforms, which is, I think, a bug. Similar is like Docker and LXT tables are marked POSIX, but only implemented in Linux. So I think we should just move them from the POSIX directory to like a Linux only directory. There's also example table gets included in the schema documentation, which I think should not be included.
The Docker containers definitely work on macOS.
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
not Docker containers, the Docker tables.
Yeah,
the LXT ones probably don't, though.
Yeah, the LXT ones don't. I have a list of those. I can just.
Got it.
I think for things that are obviously wrong, like LXD, it would be fine to like just put up a PR, just fix it.
Okay.
I haven't the faintest idea why the schema documentation misflags from Linwin stuff, there's like a lot of magic happening there. So if you want to dig into the JavaScript, by all means.
How do we do we have a Go file that takes the amalgamation, right? Or
No,
There's
this
a
is
Python file. Oh, sorry.
so the schema is a JSON file generated by CMake, right? So the build
No.
or Python.
There's a Python script named gentable under the code gen.
Yeah, it
Tools
gets called
code
by
gentable.
CMake.
So someone needs to look at
It's
whether the
not.
error is in the generated JSON or the error is in how the website renders it, I guess.
Yeah, in the Python script, there are some special cases where, like for instance, the utility folder, we decide that some folder are for all tables
Utility,
or for
yeah.
that's those specific set of tables or platforms, sorry. And yeah, that might need fixing, and also we can put there the filtering for the example table and things like that. Yeah. But in general, it uses the path it finds the specs in.
Okay, there's the gen Python file in the code gen. Okay, I thought there was like a Go file in like somewhere, but maybe I'm misremembering stuff.
No, I have Go scripts that generate the change log,
Change log, got it.
but not anything on this stuff.
Similar to that, like we have a lot of tables with like constraint, which gets documented in like verbose logs on the terminal, but not on the documentation. So I think we can like add an attribute to the table specification file and update that to kind of at least have it in the JSON, and then someone can like implement the JavaScript needed for the website. I think that'll be nice documentation update to have, especially for someone who just new to Osquery and doesn't know what a constraint is or
That sounds amazing.
And similar to that, I also kind of want to add user context to an attribute. A lot of macOS tables have like, you do select star from Chrome extension. You won't get anything because usually people do it from, Osquery running as root.
Don't we already have a user context in the table files?
No, we just have it in the description that, oh, this needs a whatever.
Okay. I am 100% behind improving the schema in any way you think is reasonable. I might want to think a little bit about the general JSON structure there, but I'm not actually too concerned. So if you want to expose user context, cool. The thing I noticed the other day is we don't expose platform architectures, and that's something that's starting to vary. So that's one we could do
as well. Yeah.
I don't think we've ever come up with a model for how to expose extended schema.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we just lump them as column.
Yeah. So I said, I'm totally in favor of fixing anything you think is reasonable in that schema.
And there are a bunch of tables which are getting deprecated or are not used or testable, like Atom packages, like, GitHub has like sunsetted Atom, the editor. The other one is Carbon Black. I don't think it works anymore, but also I don't have a license to Carbon Black, and that table hasn't seen any update in like 6 years. I think we should strive and kind of remove tables that are not getting used.
We removed tables as part of the various library upgrades that Trail of Bits was doing. I'd be fine. I feel like we should see if anyone uses Carbon Black to tell us if it works, but I would be fine removing it. I don't know if we'd want to create like a deprecated tag to put on a table to expose in the schema versus not.
That sounds
sounds like work.
Complicated. More than work, it's like, because then you have 5.2.3 where the table exists and maybe future version where it doesn't exist.
Yeah. So the question is like, if we wanted to warn people that, hey, this table's going away, where do we do that? Right now, we maybe open a GitHub issue and tag it as deprecation and maybe tell people in our release notes that like, hey, this thing's going to go away in the future. Would it help to expose that in the schema? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it would, but it shouldn't stop us from removing things that are already broken.
It has not to date.
Good. Yeah, good. If there's a good way to show in the schema like this is going away soon, I'm all for that. But like you said, Seth, that sounds like work, and I think we have other more important things that we could focus on. So.
Do you have other questions, Charvel? And as before, I think you've got pretty broad agreement for any individual fixes or improvements in this space.
Cool. Just a caveat, like I'm not a JavaScript person, so I'll get the Python and the JSON going, but I also have never deployed like Yarn and whatever we have on the Osquery website. I could not get it work locally, so.
Starville, we can take a look at that together, and maybe there's some resources on our team who can help.
It should mostly work if you have NVM version 14. I think if you were running NVM 16, it maybe doesn't work.
That sounds familiar to me as well. I remember upgrading Node and finding issues.
So there's nothing there to tell you that that's a requirement, but I run into that whenever I forget to NVM swap.
Got it.
And there's also a bunch of it's an SPA that has like, I'm not a JavaScript person, that has like a JS daemon worker thing. There's a name for those, worker thread.
Service worker.
Service worker. But it works poorly such that it has it stays running in your browser with a cache. So there's this very weird testing set of semantics where I release it and hope it works because I can't actually reload my browser hard enough to see the change.
Speaking of that, I think it still does the issue where you get the white screen after a new deploy. Like, can we disable that service worker entirely? Does anyone object to that? I'm not sure anyone's actually getting benefit from the service worker. Supposedly that would make it work offline, but I don't think it actually does.
I don't know enough to know. So would disabling the service worker make it weirdly slow to render any of this, or is that fine because it's just not that much data to fetch on page load?
My instinct would be it's not that much data to fetch on page load.
I'm good with it. I just don't know enough to do it.
I'll take a look.
Actually, that could be fine because it probably all gets bundled into a static asset anyhow. Yeah. Other questions, comments about this? If not, apparently a security release.
I have something small on the dead packages bug that Zach has brought to our attention. I have a pull request up to fix it. It was a regression in the table refactor that we have made.
What are we talking about?
That's unrelated to the security release.
Sorry, but can you repeat that, please?
I said your thing is unrelated to the security release we were about to discuss, but
Yeah.
you were following up on the last topic, right? Or is this a new topic?
You are.
This is a new topic, but I'm not sure. I think someone I saw the two, but sorry, I don't recall who that was. I saw that we have a report about the web package disabled showing the architecture for the package in the name and also in the respective arch column, while previously it wasn't present in the name column. And so I think, Alessandro was saying it has opened a pull request to fix that. It was due to the recent update to the new libdpkg and refactor of the dead packages table.
Yeah, I'll post it in the notes.
This is, I think you're talking about someone from our team noticed that the data changed from the deb packages table in an unexpected way. I'm confused right now, though. Is this connected to the security release?
No, I was mentioning it before we switched to the security release.
Okay.
Sorry.
If we're cutting a patch, it sounds like it could be a nice one to get into the patch.
Would you want this in a 5.3.1 patch?
I would say so.
Is the 5.3.1 patch going to be just a delta from 5.3, or is it going to be strictly limited to these two vulnerability updates?
I would rather cut a delta. I mean, I'd even cut a 5.4 with 3 merges with 3 things in it. Like, what is this proposal for a 5.3.1?
So 2 dependencies, I think it was OpenSSL and SQLite, had issues that had either low impact or no impact to Osquery, but they will flag dependency auditing tools. So those tools say, oh, you're using SQLite version so-and-so. Yeah, it's not a false positive in the sense that those issues exist up in those dependencies, but in terms of how they impact Osquery, there's no urgency here except by teams that are deploying Osquery, and they need it to be a clean, pass on these checking tools. So it's already merged. The updates just need to be put in some kind of release as soon as possible, so that these teams can continue deploying Osquery.
So I guess maybe one question is, we use so many libraries, and many of them will keep having security vulnerabilities that do not impact us. Is there a way for these teams to recognize that and not have us need to cut releases that don't fundamentally help our posture any?
So whenever we get this request, we usually help them with understanding the impact. So we have to do that analysis. Sometimes the analysis takes longer than it would just to update the dependencies. Sometimes they're satisfied with getting the explanation, but they bureaucratically prevented from getting an exception to whatever the policy is. So an in-depth technical explanation is not really helpful to them. They need to have their dashboard with green lights. They need to have it pass. It's something that we would avoid if we had more frequent releases, but having a release every 3 months isn't frequent enough. I mean, if you were to ask them, they want the issue resolved within a day of the problem being discovered, and that's not realistic. But I think it's also not realistic to ask teams to wait like an entire quarter on the calendar for.
Well, so here's what I'm struggling with a little bit, is that, people whose primary motivation is to make some dashboard go green without any deeper understanding of what's happening puts us in a very uncomfortable place, because we have a lot of dependencies. Y'all know you maintain them, right? And sort of every time some dependency has some irrelevant bug, even if we had a monthly release, it just doesn't, like, the motivations are weird and don't feel aligned to me. Like, it's not making Osquery better. So that I'm kind of in the well, we can cut a release because it makes you happy and because we'll get some more things out. But fundamentally, it doesn't feel good to cut a release because some poorly written third-party tool needs a green dashboard.
Well, the tools are, they're never going to be able to follow code paths and discover impact and understand, how Osquery uses its dependencies. So we'll be in this situation forever, and I think we need to be agile to be able to provide point releases so that it's not a burden on us. So I agree with you. It's some annoyance to us, but if we could make this less of a burden, then we can address the underlying problem. Go ahead.
Since folks want to pay y'all to do this kind of thing, like, can we find a way to let the Trail of Bits team be able to easily put out these kind of things without it taking effort from Seth, for example, and then does that get around some of the concern?
Well, I think Trail of Bits maybe even can. I think Alessandro and Stefano probably both have the ability to cut releases today. I think point releases are ultimately more work for us than simply minor releases. So I'm somewhat against point releases, but I am broadly in favor of more frequent minor releases.
Well, if we want to get back onto the number of releases, calendar we originally intended for the year, 5.4 is milestone still scheduled for the end of this month. And I suppose we could call that the next release, avoid calling anything a security release and just put out 5.4.
So let's maybe talk about this in a little bit more I don't know, practical or theoretical. I can't even decide. If we followed a model where we were cutting releases every month or every 2 months, and let's say we went automated that tagging, right? Like we have much of the automation in place. You could imagine that on the first of every month, we just cut a new minor release, and maybe we automate that through GitHub Actions. Like I could imagine that. What's the flow to declaring a release stable, and what work does that require? So that's probably the only place where we currently have a more okay, so there's a couple of places in cutting a release that require some amount of human oversight. One of them is writing a changelog, and changelog can drift from our releases, so that's not strictly a blocker. And the other one is in declaring a release stable, and our process for declaring a release stable is roughly Collide and Fleet push it to beta customers. We wait a week, and then if no one says anything, we call it stable. It's not a very rigorous process. And my recollection from prior conversations is that the various customers you talk to do not consider beta releases adequate. So there is just as much pressure then to hurry up and declare a stable release as it is to actually cut a tag. So,
yeah,
if we move to a more frequent release cycle, how do we want to change our process to have stable releases?
So monthly releases shouldn't exist in pre-release for 2 weeks, I suppose.
Well,
but what is really accomplished in those 2 weeks? Usually it's just waiting out a timer to have people have time to raise objections. I don't know that testing really happens, is what I'm saying.
I mean, I can tell you that when I push it to beta, it lands on, Collide computers. We'll notice if anything breaks really badly. Zach, you're muted if you're talking to us.
Yeah, it's about similar on Fleet side. I've just changed it such that now anything I push, to our Edge channel will go out to all of the Fleet internal computers, and we also have some very basic automated smoke testing. So that's the extent of what happens. It's also, it's also my goal within the Fleet product to help make it easier for folks, not just to stay up to date with the most stable, but to do things like slowly roll out new version and be able to explicitly set the version that you're on and the version that you're rolling to, which would give more control over that kind of thing, but it's not going to help the Osquery project much in terms of determining the stability of things. Or it will over time, because we do collect some usage statistics, and we could start collecting Osquery versions, but it's I doubt we're going to be able to collect sufficient community data over the time periods that we'd like to see releases go from sort of pre-release to stable.
Would moving to a significantly more frequent release cycle change that for you? Like, would that be not desirable for Fleet DM?
I'd love to see more frequent releases, if only to see new features go out quicker. And particularly because we don't tend to QA, I mean, as Osquery, it's hard to, and we don't tend to do that much QA, like releasing more often with fewer changes seems to me like a pretty similar level of risk, but we get new features out sooner and fixes out sooner. And so I'd be happy to see that.
Okay, so what would it be like if we cut a release a month? Can we automate that?
Which part exactly? Like I recall you were working. There was a PR we opened from you, and we can proceed on that. I think to something we do. Well, actually, how to generate the new schemas for the website, for instance.
Yeah, I don't remember where I left that.
Or yeah.
Well, I mean, if I split this into pieces, what we need is we'd need a monthly job that would make a tag and trigger the code sign builds. And that seems pretty straightforward to me. Seems doable. And then I can break this down. I see a lot of places where we have sort of some manual steps right now. But where would people like me to break down the steps in this? You want it in a ticket or discussion?
We have a release issue template. Is this more like a checklist for a release?
The release issue template should probably just go away. So if we wanted to automate cutting releases, I think that we would need a cron job to make a tags, because GitHub supports this. We would need a cron job to trigger a code sign build. GitHub supports this. We should probably change the semantics of how we transition from a beta to a stable release, because right now doing that requires rebuilding our packages, which generates new checksums across the board. That's a little bit messy, so we should think about that. We probably need to figure out how to automate the connection between a GitHub release and the website. That's probably doable. We just haven't done it yet. Those are the things I can think of offhand. We need to come up with a changelog approach. That's not super hard either. So, that seems pretty tractable. I'm happy to project plan that out or break that up or put up an issue or something.
Maybe we can like document that in like the tools repo under Osquery or something.
Something.
Yeah, like a packaging repo or maybe even just in the wiki.
I think I kind of liked the fact that the code signing was being run manually, so that we are sure there's nothing weird inside that is going to leak keys that we may have merged by mistake in master.
I would say the time to do that is at the cutting of a tag more than at the code sign trigger. What do you think? Like when I trigger code signing runs, I don't actually re-review everything. I assume that the tag is good.
Sorry, I had to move away for a bit and back. Yeah, true. I haven't thought this completely. It was just something I worry about easily. The private keys.
I think it's a fine thing to worry about. I just don't know how to sort of balance that against the desire to have, significantly more frequent releases, and thinking about how do we actually make that a tractable or a meaningful review and not just kind of a blind checkbox. Bouncing back very slightly, the deb packages regression on the name column. What's the correct behavior?
We were using the DPKG library in a weird way. When I refactored this, I started using the APIs in a better way. And there's a function named pkg name that will return you the package name according to a behavior that you can specify with the flag. Previously, we were just returning the package name. This new call, when added, we used a behavior flag that will, in some cases, suffix the package name with a colon and then the architecture. And so the fix is just removing this change so that, we already have the architecture in the dedicated column. And so we can easily remove this.
Okay. Sounds like you think it's reasonable. Sounds like Fleet thinks it's reasonable. So I thumbed your PR. Mostly I wanted to talk about that real fast because it sounds like people want to try and get a 5.4 out as soon as possible. Do folks want to do that now or at the end of the month?
I am working on a couple of reviews that you left, Seth, like with the password policy. So I'm trying to get that in. They're mostly knit, so I should be able to get that in.
Well, what I'm wondering is like, do we want to just try and set up a cron job to cut a tag every month? Although, Alessandro, I don't know how that impacts your comment about making sure we try and get a little bit of manual oversight before code sign. Or
just because it's tagged and signed doesn't mean that people are going to deploy it untested, right?
Signed is signed. So I think Alessandro is, at least I would come from the perspective that if we've signed it, we're somewhat attesting to its validity.
No more so than we are in pre-releases, but
no, absolutely. That's right. Like pre-releases is still, we're attesting that this is probably not a rootkit, right? We're not saying it's a great release, but like there's a sort of an implicit attestation that we think the code is good.
and mostly it's accomplished through reviews. So merging is where the attestation happens, even though signing is where it gets officiated.
Alessandro, do you raised this?
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to handle this. Yeah, my concern, the specifics of my concern is whether we have something in one of the branches that will either leak the private key, or maybe we had bad tables in the past. For example, in Windows, really bad tables that you could exploit. And if you have a signed binary, you can do things. And so, yeah, these are just worries that I have in my mind right now. I haven't really thought about them.
I would encourage you to think about them because I think it is a hard problem. And I think generally we've talked about gating that at merge about when we merge. And we'll always make mistakes, like that just happens. But I don't know that adding an additional check at signing time changes effectively our risk profile there. So
Yeah, I believe whoever could commit code without a review could also make that signing workflow run, right? No?
If we change things, yes. Right now, no, it is manual, and someone has to open this repository and start a workflow. So the biggest change I can see now is if this becomes something that is automated, then everyone has to keep up with all the changes before things are started automatically.
But I guess what I'm saying is like is this a practical difference? Like, is there anyone who's actually reviewing the entire diff from 5.3.0 to present before tagging and releasing?
Probably not in detail, but the biggest things like maybe new features that are big, so new tables.
Yeah, but like I review those on merge if I review them at all.
Yeah.
And like speaking as the person who cuts most of the tags, I do no code review at that time. I don't know if I should. Maybe another direction here is to look at the code owners to try and apply additional permissions for certain sensitive areas of the code, but I don't know if that would help us.
Yeah, I guess I'll follow your lead on things, and I'm not gonna veto anything, like, or and I'm not even against it. I was just thinking about it.
My general bias is that automation will almost always improve security posture because it removes humans, and humans are frequently the fallible element. So while it does sort of seem scary in that, if you get something into master, then it'll end up signed eventually, I don't think that's a different stance than today. So that's kind of my feeling. But anything we can think about improving that, I'm down for discussion and improvements around.
So in the near term, can we make 5.4 June 30th, and we'll just make a push to review and merge the important PRs? I know we have a lot in the milestone, but the important stuff.
I think we should try and release more frequently. I think we can kind of ignore milestones a bit. They're kind of just like notes to ourselves. I think come July 1, you can just cut a 5.4 release. Like I don't think there are any prerequisites for that. Like if you have things merged that you would like to get out in a release, right? So I think it's totally reasonable just to cut a 5.4.0 on July 1.
Okay, let's shoot for that then. There's a few things that we should review and merge then.
Right. More things always welcome, but let's aim for an August 5.5 too, and then let's try and not try, like, the less we put pressure on trying to get things in, the easier it will be for us. Just cut the 5.4 tag and then cut a 5.5 tag and then cut a 5.6 tag.
The milestones, by the way, they're helpful for indicating the roadmap to the people who are like, is this being worked on? And the answer is always, well, if you're working on it. But if it's in the milestone, would be a great way to say, like, don't expect it soon. Here's the things that are being worked on.
I think what I'm trying to think about is you are reasonably raising the issue that we tend to lag on our releases. And I think that one of the best ways to address that is to use a time-based release schedule, barring major events, right? As long as we're not like, ooh, main's unstable, let's not cut a release. We should just cut releases on the 1st of every month or every other month. Intersecting that with how do we signal what's being worked on or what we think is important through milestones seems like a good question, but maybe the milestone shouldn't be 5.4. The milestone should be like next release, and then things can kind of just stay in it. Like I don't quite know how it all lines up. or if we just want to say take everything out, push it forward, or I think we'll just sort of have to feel our way through it a little bit. But I think if we want more regular releases, we sort of have to decouple them from milestones and just move them to something time-based.
Okay, well, we can start calling the milestones July release, August release.
Something like that. Or maybe just Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and what release it might come sooner or later. But I don't know. Last item on the agenda, security audit.
Yeah, that's so Trailbits was commissioned to do a security audit, and we had like 12 findings, which I won't share here yet, but they were either feature oriented, like long-term planning changes that would make improvements to the security hardening, or they were relatively minor impact that would be like, okay, this could be a denial of service at most. So with that in mind, we favor publishing the report, even though not every one of the bugs has been fixed. Some of them are going to go into a backlog, but I was going to share the report with a limited number of folks so that you can I don't know, offer opinions on the publishing of the report. I don't think it's going to have like a negative consequence to publish it, but I will let us make that decision as a group.
My initial thoughts are that you are probably an excellently placed individual to determine how many things we need to fix before you publish your report. So, I'm happy to roll with your recommendations on that, Mike.
All right.
I think you can probably create a private channel if you want. There is a private TSC channel that certainly Alessandro is in. So either feel free to create a security report channel to do what you want, or whatever works for you seems fine.
If you want to invite me as a guest to the TSC channel, I know I'm not at the TSC, but we can.
I don't
talk about it.
You just make a new channel if you want that.
New channel? All right.
Yeah, I think you can just do it.
Similarly, I trust your judgment on what your team's judgment on what needs to be fixed now and what can be done later. But I do like the idea of giving, the core folks a chance to have a look before publishing.
Okay. Well, then look for that channel soon. We'll take it from there.
Things I'd ask you, and kind of go out any which way on. Consider whether any of these need a GitHub advisory created. Consider whether the security report should land somewhere in the Osquery documentation versus a Trailbits blog post versus both. I don't know. You know the docs as well as I do.
I think there was a security report several years ago, right?
Probably
team published something.
Whatever you think is reasonable, I'll approve roughly.
Okay.
That's all I got. So thank you. I'm excited to read whatever y'all came up with.
All righty.
Anything else? If not, we should break. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. We will try and get a 5-4 cut. Mike, feel free to make noise, or Alessandro or Stefano. Both of you, I think, can cut tags. So, Mike, you might even be able to cut a tag. I don't remember.
But I leave it to you guys. So we'll cut that tag as soon as we've merged some of these high priority PRs.
That seems fine. Like maybe not before July 1. I just we could aim for first of the month or something.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you, Brad.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.